Daniel Hayes began his morning the same way he always did, walking along the long stretch of land that covered his ranch like a warm, wide blanket. The sun had just started rising, coloring the sky in soft orange and pink. It was the kind of peaceful morning that made a man breathe slower, as if the world itself whispered that there was no rush. Daniel carried a small rope, a canteen, and the simple habit of checking everything before the day became busy. The cattle liked to wander along the creek, and he wanted to make sure none had broken through the fence again. He expected nothing more than hoofprints in the mud and the calm sound of flowing water. Instead, something unexpected waited for him beyond the tall cottonwood trees. As he stepped closer to the creek, he heard voices soft, echoing between the stones. He paused, thinking maybe it was some travelers or workers from a nearby ranch, but these voices sounded different, lighter, almost like gentle singing. Curious but cautious, Daniel slowed his steps. The creek curved around a cluster of brush, and once he reached the bend, the sight before him made him freeze in place. 3 Apache women were bathing in the clear water, their long dark hair flowing down their backs, their laughter quiet but bright like birdsong. It was clear they had not noticed him yet. Daniel's breath caught in his chest, not because he felt fear or anger, but because he knew this was a moment where one wrong move could cause misunderstanding. He understood the history between ranchers and Apache families: tension, suspicion, stories passed around campfires about trouble that could start from even a harmless situation. He knew he had walked into a private moment, and he did not want to cause panic or disrespect. Slowly, carefully, Daniel stepped backward, thinking he could leave without them noticing. But as he turned, a branch cracked under his boot. All 3 women turned their heads at the same time, their eyes locked onto him from across the water. Daniel felt a sharp jolt in his chest. Not from fear, but from realization he had been seen. And there was no quiet escape now. For a brief second, no one moved. The creek kept flowing. The morning stayed calm, but the air between them grew still like held breath. Daniel raised both hands, not in defense, but in a gesture that said he meant no harm. His voice came out steady but gentle, almost apologetic, as he said he had not known they were there. He told them he was only checking the land, nothing more. The women, to his surprise, did not scream or try to flee. They didn't duck behind the rocks or rush toward their belongings. Instead, they watched him with eyes full of calm intelligence. The eldest, a woman with a face that showed both strength and softness, tilted her head slightly. Daniel could tell she understood at least some English, perhaps more. Her gaze held no fear, only awareness, curiosity even. The other 2 whispered something to her in their language, their voices low and quick. Daniel stood still, hardly breathing, hoping they understood his peaceful intentions. He kept his eyes respectful, looking down or to the side, trying to show he wasn't there to stare or intrude. Then something happened that shook him more than anything else. They did not run. They did not hide. They simply watched him with steady expressions, as if judging what kind of man he was and deciding whether he was dangerous or harmless. Daniel could feel his heart pounding. He felt like he had stepped into a place not meant for him. Yet he could not undo the moment. All he could do was let them see his honesty. He spoke again, quietly. He told them he would step away and give them space. He said they had nothing to fear from him. His voice remained calm even though his nerves buzzed. Slowly, he took a few steps backward, showing he was leaving. But instead of turning and rushing off, he stopped several yards away and waited. He wanted them to see he wasn't trying to ambush them or scare them. He simply wanted to give them safety and time. For several minutes, the creek was silent except for water sliding over stones. Then the women finished bathing and moved to the shore where their clothes and blankets rested. Daniel kept his eyes away to give them privacy. He heard the rustling of cloth and the soft murmurs between them. When the sound quieted again, he turned slightly to see them wrapped in blankets, now standing on the bank. The eldest woman stepped forward. Her posture was straight, confident, and calm. Daniel respected that deeply. She didn't seem frightened of him, only cautious in a wise and steady way. She spoke her name Naya in a clear voice. Daniel repeated it softly, wanting to show respect. The other two women stepped close behind her. Standing in unity, Naya told him, in simple English, that they had been traveling for days. Dust covered their clothes, and their tired shoulders showed the weight of their journey. She explained they had used the creek to wash because their path had been long and dry. Her English was not perfect, but it was clear enough for Daniel to understand. He listened closely, focused on her words, careful not to interrupt or show impatience. He nodded slowly, relieved that she was willing to speak instead of seeing him as a threat. He told her he was a rancher, that this land was his, but he also told her something important, that they had every right to use the creek. He said the water belonged to the land, not to any one man, and that he did not mind them being there. The younger women looked at each other with faint surprise, as if they had expected a completely different reaction from him. Many ranchers were known to react out of fear or anger when meeting Apache families. Daniel had heard stories of shouting, threats, or people riding off to tell the sheriff. He had never agreed with such behavior. Respect was something he lived by, something he believed in stronger than fences or property lines. Naya asked him why he had stayed instead of running to alert others. Daniel shrugged gently and said he saw no reason to cause trouble when none existed. He explained that fear often made people act foolishly, but he didn't want to be one of those people. He meant his words sincerely, and the Apache women could sense it. Feeling the weight of the situation ease, Daniel took the canteen from his belt and placed it on a rock halfway between them. He stepped back again and told them the water was clean and cool if they needed it. He didn't push it toward them or insist, he just left it there, an honest offer. Naya nodded in gratitude. The youngest woman stepped forward to take it, her eyes watching Daniel closely. But not with fear, more like evaluation. The way someone measures whether a person carries kindness or danger in their heart. She took a slow sip and passed it to her sisters. Daniel remained still, not wanting to appear impatient or looming. He simply stood with calm posture, letting them decide how close or distant they wished to remain. When Naya handed the canteen back, she spoke a soft thank you, her voice sincere. Daniel felt something shift in the air, a sense of trust beginning to form, fragile but real. He knew trust between their people did not come easily, but this moment felt different. This moment felt like something new, something peaceful born out of quiet understanding. And as the morning sun rose higher, Daniel realized something he had not expected when he left his home that day. A simple act of respect had created a connection strong enough to change the entire direction of the hours ahead. Daniel stood by the creek, giving the three Apache women as much space as they needed. He didn't want them to feel watched or pressured. He simply stayed at a respectful distance, letting the cool morning breeze move through the cottonwood leaves while the women finished drying off. The quiet between them felt different now, less tense, more thoughtful. Daniel could sense they were no longer unsure about him. Instead, they seemed to be observing him the same way he observed the land, calmly and with careful understanding. When the women finally approached him, they came slowly, without fear. Their clothes were simple, worn from long travel. Their blankets were wrapped tightly around their shoulders to protect them from the remaining morning chill. The eldest, Naya, walked at the front as before, carrying herself with the calm strength of someone who had weathered many journeys. The other two walked behind her in quiet support. Daniel straightened his posture without meaning to, as if showing respect was something his body chose on its own. He didn't speak first. He let them decide how the conversation would begin. After a few silent steps, Naya stopped a few feet away from him. Her dark eyes studied his expression, looking for anything unusual or dishonest. But Daniel had nothing to hide, and that honesty showed on his face. Naya spoke softly, telling him they had been traveling for 3 days and 2 nights with very little rest. She explained that their horses had become startled during a storm and ran off, leaving the women to continue on foot. Daniel listened without interrupting, noticing the exhaustion in their voices, the slight slump in their shoulders. He nodded slowly, showing he understood their situation even though he had not experienced it himself. He asked them gently where they were heading, not out of suspicion, but out of concern. Naya told him they were trying to reach their people, who were moving across land to meet family from another region. But the storm had separated them. Their supplies were low, and they had only enough food for one more day. The creek was the first place in hours where they had found clean water. Daniel felt a pull inside him, a quiet sense of responsibility. These women had done nothing wrong. They were simply trying to catch up with their family. He couldn't imagine turning them away, not after hearing what they had endured. He pointed toward his ranch, explaining that it wasn't far. He offered them a place to rest in the open shed he used for travelers and workers who needed shelter for a night. He made it clear they did not have to come inside the house or anywhere private, just a safe spot where they could rest and regain strength. The women exchanged glances. He could tell they were deciding whether to trust him. In their eyes, Daniel saw caution, but also a small spark of relief. Naya asked him why he would offer such kindness when many others might not. Daniel simply shrugged and said helping people didn't cost anything, and that he believed kindness was something a person should give when the opportunity came. His answer made the younger women look at him with a new kind of curiosity. They weren't smiling, but their expressions softened, as if they had finally understood the nature of the man standing before them. After a moment, Naya spoke again, saying they would accept his offer. But she added gently that they wanted to walk behind him instead of beside him, just until they reached the ranch, as a sign of safety. Daniel smiled faintly and agreed without hesitation. He understood that trust was something built slowly, like a fence made plank by plank, not in a single moment. He began walking toward the ranch, taking steady steps along the narrow trail. Behind him, he heard the soft footsteps of the three women, moving carefully but no longer with the frantic energy of travelers unsure of their surroundings. As they walked, Daniel pointed out areas where the ground dipped or where a fallen branch lay hidden among the grass. He didn't turn around often, but he made sure to look back every so often to check if they were keeping pace. Each time he glanced back, the women nodded slightly, letting him know they were well. The trail soon opened into the wide, sunlit field that marked Daniel's land. The fences stretched long and straight. The barn stood solid and familiar, and the horses grazed peacefully in the distance. The ranch looked calm and welcoming, and Daniel hoped the women would feel the same. When they reached the open shed, Daniel stepped aside to allow them to look inside first. It wasn't fancy, just a sturdy shelter with a clean floor, a few tools, and extra blankets stored neatly in a corner. But it was safe, dry, and private. The women stepped in slowly, examining their surroundings. Daniel waited outside so they could settle in without feeling watched. After a few moments, Naya stepped out and gave him a grateful nod. Daniel told them he would bring water and something to eat. Before leaving, he added one more thing, that they could lock the door from the inside if it made them feel safer. Naya appreciated the offer but shook her head lightly, saying she did not believe he meant them harm. That small gesture of trust touched Daniel more deeply than he expected. He walked back to his house and prepared a simple meal: bread, beans, dried fruit, and a pot of warm broth. He placed everything on a wooden table just outside the shed. He didn't want to hand the food directly to them, because he didn't want them to feel pressured or watched. He knocked lightly to let them know it was there, then stepped away to give them space. Inside the shed, the three women sat together and examined the food. The youngest woman touched the bread gently, almost as if testing whether it was real. Then the sisters ate slowly, sharing everything equally. They spoke in quiet voices in their language, though Daniel couldn't hear the words. What he could hear, faintly, was the shift in their tone, a softness, a comfort that had not been there earlier. When they finished eating, Naya stepped outside again. She asked Daniel why he had not brought other men with him or gone to tell the sheriff. Daniel shook his head and told her he believed that most problems in the world started when people spread fear for no reason. If he told others, someone might assume trouble where none existed. He wanted peace, not tension. His answer surprised Naya. She told him in gentle words that many ranchers reacted with fear when they saw Apache families, and some even shouted or chased them away. Daniel listened quietly, then said something that came straight from his heart. Fear often made people see danger where there was none. And a person needed strength, not fear. to make the right choices. Naya's expression softened even more. She told him they had seen enough of fear on their journey, and that his calm behavior at the creek had shown them he was different. Daniel felt humbled. He didn't think he had done anything extraordinary. He had only acted in a way he believed everyone should. The sun had risen higher by now, warming the land. The wind felt gentle. For the first time since meeting the women, Daniel felt completely at ease in their presence. The gap between them, the one formed by history, misunderstanding, and fear, felt smaller now, as if kindness had begun to build a bridge across it. The three sisters rested inside the shed, grateful for the safety and quiet. Daniel returned to his usual work around the ranch, though his thoughts kept drifting back to them. He wondered how far they had traveled, what hardships they had faced, and how strong they must be to continue on foot with such determination. Their courage impressed him more than he could explain. Before the day ended, Daniel brought them extra blankets and a lantern, placing them at the door again to avoid intrusion. When Naya thanked him, her voice held a warmth he had not heard before. It was clear that trust between them had grown not completely, but enough to feel real. As the sun lowered behind the hills and the sky turned soft with evening colors, Daniel realized something important. This meeting by the creek was not just an unexpected moment, it was the beginning of a story that would change the way he saw people, trust, and kindness forever. Daniel spent the afternoon checking his fences and feeding his horses, but his thoughts kept returning to the three Apache women resting in the shed. He could not ignore the feeling that their journey had been far tougher than they had admitted. The way they walked, the careful way they handled their blankets, the quiet tone in their voices, all of it told him they had been struggling long before the storm separated them from their family. Daniel respected their strength. Many travelers would have given up after losing horses and supplies, yet these women continued on foot across rough land without complaint. As the sun drifted toward late afternoon, Daniel prepared another small meal. He thought about what would be easiest for them to eat, settling on soft bread, boiled potatoes, and a little warm soup. He placed everything on a wooden tray and carried it toward the shed. Once again, he set the food outside and stepped back so they could take it without pressure. He knocked gently to let them know it was ready. Inside the shed, footsteps approached slowly. The door opened, and the middle sister stepped out. Her expression showed surprise at the warm food, as if she expected nothing more than dry bread. She murmured a quiet thank you before bringing the tray inside. Daniel smiled, but he did not linger. He wanted them to feel comfortable, not watched. A little later, Naya appeared again, holding the empty bowls. She thanked him for the food and said something that made Daniel pause. She told him that they had not eaten a warm meal in many days. Daniel felt a heavy ache in his chest at the thought. He told her she was welcome to eat as much as they needed while they stayed. Naya studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of hidden motive. But she found none. His kindness was sincere. As the soft golden light of evening spread across the ranch, Daniel finished his daily tasks. Once everything was settled, he walked back to the shed to check if the women needed more blankets or water. But before he could say anything, Naya gestured for him to sit on an old wooden stool outside the shed. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then sat down carefully. The three sisters joined him in a half-circle, sitting on the ground with their blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Daniel realized they wanted to talk. Naya began by explaining how they had come to be alone. Their family group had traveled across the land to meet relatives from another region for a traditional gathering. But when the storm came, lightning and thunder startled the horses, and the group scattered. The three sisters had tried to find the others, but the storm was too strong. They lost sight of everyone. Their horses bolted in different directions, and the women were forced to continue on foot. Daniel listened with quiet respect. He noticed how the younger sister spoke very little, but her eyes followed every word, every movement. She seemed the most cautious of the three, yet also the most observant. The middle sister occasionally added soft details, describing how they rationed their food and searched for water. None of them complained. They spoke as people who accepted hardship as part of life. Daniel asked gently if they had been afraid. Naya answered with calm honesty. She said they were not afraid of the land, but they worried about crossing paths with strangers who might misunderstand them. They had heard stories from other travelers about ranchers who reacted with fear or anger toward Apache families. Naya admitted that when they first saw Daniel at the creek, they expected him to shout or threaten them. But instead, he had stepped back, apologized, and tried to give them space. That moment, she explained, told them everything they needed to know about the kind of man he was. Daniel felt his cheeks warm with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He didn't think he had done anything special. Respect should be natural, he believed. But hearing the women speak so openly made him realize how rare such moments might be for them. Naya then turned the conversation back to Daniel. She asked him why he lived alone on such a large ranch. Daniel chuckled softly. Surprised by the question, he explained that he had inherited the ranch from his father, who believed every person should work the land with steady hands and a patient heart. Daniel never married and never had children. His life centered around the ranch, the animals, and the quiet rhythm of each day. Sometimes he felt lonely, but he had grown used to it. The middle sister commented quietly that a man who worked alone must be strong. Daniel shrugged again, saying strength was not always in the muscles but in the choices a person made. Naya seemed to appreciate that answer. She told him strength could also mean knowing when to help someone without expecting anything back. The conversation continued gently, flowing like the creek they had met beside. Daniel asked if the sisters knew where their family might be heading. Naya nodded, explaining that their people followed seasonal routes. If the sisters could reach a certain old trail near the hills, they had a good chance of finding signs of their family's movement. But traveling while tired and low on supplies made the journey dangerous. Daniel considered this carefully. He wanted to help, but he also wanted to avoid making decisions for them. He respected their independence. So he asked what they planned to do next. Naya said they would rest for the night and leave at sunrise. They did not want to cause trouble or stay longer than necessary. Daniel understood, though a part of him worried they would leave too soon. Before the sisters returned inside the shed, Daniel provided them with an extra water jug and a few more blankets. The youngest sister hesitated before taking one of the blankets. She met Daniel's eyes briefly, and though her expression was serious, there was also a soft acknowledgement there, a quiet way of saying she saw his kindness and did not take it lightly. As darkness settled over the ranch, the sky filled with stars. Daniel lit a lantern and placed it near the shed so the women could see if they needed anything at night. He did not want them stumbling in the dark or feeling unsafe. Then he walked back toward his home, glancing over his shoulder one last time. The shed glowed warmly with the soft light of the lantern, and Daniel hoped the sisters felt at peace. Inside the shed, the three women arranged their blankets and spoke quietly about their journey. They talked about Daniel's unexpected kindness, comparing it to the harsh reactions they had experienced from some travelers. The youngest sister admitted she had expected danger at the creek, but Daniel's calm reaction had changed everything. Naya agreed, saying they had been fortunate to meet a man who valued peace more than fear. Daniel sat at his small kitchen table, sipping warm coffee and thinking about them. He wondered how they stayed so strong through hardship. He admired their courage. He hoped tomorrow would bring them closer to their family. He didn't realize that his thoughts were already changing him, teaching him new things about trust and understanding. That night, the ranch was quiet. The horses settled in the fields, the wind shifted softly, and the shed remained peaceful. Daniel slept lightly, ready to help the women again if the need arose. He had no idea that the following morning would bring a moment that deepened the bond between them, a moment that would stay with him far longer than he expected. The night passed quietly on the ranch, with only the soft wind brushing against the wooden fences and the distant call of an owl echoing across the dark fields. Daniel slept lightly, as he always did when unexpected guests were on his land, not because he feared them, but because he felt responsible for their safety. Every now and then he woke, looked toward the dim light of the lantern near the shed, and listened for any unusual sound. But the night remained calm, peaceful, and still. Morning arrived slowly, with the sky turning pale silver before the first hints of gold. Daniel rose before the sun fully lifted over the horizon. He washed his face, put on his boots, and stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the smell of damp earth from the small rain that had fallen during the night. He glanced toward the shed and noticed the sisters were already awake. The door was slightly open, and he could hear the gentle rustle of blankets being folded. Daniel walked toward the shed, but he stopped a few steps away so they wouldn't feel crowded. Naya stepped out first, her posture steady and calm. She greeted him softly, and Daniel nodded in return. The middle and youngest sisters soon joined her. They looked more rested than the day before, though their faces still carried the fatigue of long travel. Before Daniel could speak, thunder rolled faintly across the sky. He tilted his head and studied the dark clouds building in the distance. The storm looked heavier than last night's light shower. He didn't want the sisters to get caught in it. He told them gently that he didn't think it was safe for them to travel right away. Naya followed his gaze toward the thickening clouds. She exchanged glances with her sisters. They were determined to leave soon, but they understood the danger of traveling in storms. Daniel offered that they stay another day, just until the weather passed. He didn't want them to risk walking through open land with lightning and heavy rain. The youngest sister hesitated, looking unsure. Naya took her hand in a comforting gesture before turning to Daniel. She asked if staying one more day would trouble him. Daniel shook his head and said it would trouble him far more to let them walk into danger. His sincere tone made the decision easier for them. As the morning grew darker, Daniel invited them to help gather firewood before the storm arrived. He didn't want them to feel useless, or like guests who couldn't contribute. He believed everyone should feel included in the rhythm of the ranch. The sisters agreed and followed him toward the edge of the field where fallen branches often piled after windy nights. They worked together quietly but smoothly. The middle sister carried the smaller branches, moving with gentle steps. The youngest pulled twigs and thin sticks from the grass, occasionally glancing at Daniel to see if she was doing it right. Daniel offered a small smile whenever she looked uncertain, and she gradually relaxed, trusting that he wasn't judging her. Naya lifted heavier pieces of wood with ease, showing her strength. She asked Daniel about his daily life, what he grew, how many animals he cared for, how he managed such a large ranch alone. Daniel answered her questions simply. He talked about the long days, the quiet evenings, and the satisfaction of seeing the land respond to his hard work. The conversation felt natural. There was no tension, no suspicion, only calm understanding growing between them. By midday, the sky had darkened so much that it looked like dusk. The wind grew stronger, blowing through the grass and bending the tops of the trees. Daniel guided the sisters back toward the ranch house. He checked the barn doors, secured the loose tools, and tied down the wagon so it wouldn't roll in the wind. The sisters helped him in every task without being asked, moving quickly and working together like a well-trained team. The first drops of rain fell slowly, then suddenly turned heavier. Daniel hurried the women toward the shed so they could stay dry. He brought extra blankets again, along with a small lantern. He told them they were free to rest while the storm passed. But before stepping away, Naya asked if he would join them for a moment, just long enough to talk. Daniel nodded and sat outside the shed, protected from the rain by the wide overhang of the roof. Inside, the sisters settled near the lantern's warm glow. Naya sat closest to the door, so she could speak to Daniel easily. The storm grew louder around them, with thunder rolling deeply and rain hitting the roof like thousands of tiny drums. Naya began speaking about her people, not in great detail, but in a gentle way that shared their traditions. She spoke of gatherings where families met to exchange stories, food, and memories. She described long walks across the land, following paths worn by generations. She also spoke about the challenges they faced: losing land, losing trust with settlers, struggling to find safe spaces to travel. Daniel listened carefully, understanding that she wasn't sharing these things to ask for pity. She was sharing them because she felt comfortable enough to speak honestly. He told her that he wished things were different, that people could trust one another more easily. He admitted that many ranchers reacted out of fear, simply because they didn't understand the Apache people. Naya agreed. She said fear created walls where none needed to exist. Then she said something that touched Daniel deeply. She told him she believed trust began with small actions. His respectful behavior at the creek had shown more than words ever could. She said that simple moments often held the greatest power to change how people viewed each other. Daniel felt humbled again. He believed in treating others kindly, but he never realized how meaningful such actions could be for people who were often treated with suspicion. As the storm raged on, the sisters shared more small pieces of their journey. They spoke about the difficulties they faced after the storm separated them from their family. Long nights with no shelter, dry days with little water, and constant worry about crossing paths with people who misunderstood their intentions. The youngest sister finally spoke more than she had in the previous days. Her voice was soft, but she explained how frightened she had been when they lost their horses. Daniel reassured her gently, telling her that fear was natural in such moments, but courage was shown in how she continued moving forward anyway. The storm lasted longer than expected. The sky stayed dark, and rain poured down with heavy force. Lightning flashed in the distance, and thunder rolled like deep drums. Yet inside the shed and under the shelter of the ranch, Daniel and the sisters felt a strange sense of safety. Talking together eased the long hours, and the storm outside made their small circle feel warm and connected. As evening approached, the rain softened. The clouds slowly thinned, letting a little pale light through. When the storm finally passed, Daniel stood and stretched, telling the sisters he would bring warm soup again. Before he left, Naya quietly told him that his kindness had helped them feel safe in a world where safety was often hard to find. Daniel nodded. Though words felt too small to answer the weight of her gratitude, the sisters rested again that evening, comforted by the quiet after the storm. Daniel sat at his kitchen table later, thinking about everything they had told him. He realized that real trust came from moments like these, moments where people shared their stories, helped one another, and saw the world not through fear, but through understanding. He didn't know it yet, but the next morning would bring their journey to a turning point. And Daniel would find himself even more connected to the sisters than before, in ways he could never have expected. The morning after the storm felt fresh and clean, as though the land itself had washed away every worry from the day before. The sky was wide and bright, painted in gentle shades of blue. Drops of rain still clung to the tall grass, sparkling like tiny crystals when the sunlight touched them. Daniel stepped outside his house and inhaled the cool air deeply. It smelled of wet earth, pine, and early sunshine. He glanced toward the shed and noticed movement. The three sisters were already awake. He walked toward them with a warm expression, not wanting to startle them. Naya stepped out first, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. The middle sister stood beside her, smoothing her hair with her fingers. The youngest sister stayed a few steps behind them, quiet but alert as always. Daniel smiled softly and greeted them. They returned the greeting with small nods and gentle expressions. Naya explained that they were ready to continue their journey. She said they had rested well, eaten enough to regain strength, and now wished to find the old trail that would guide them toward their family. Her voice was calm, but Daniel could sense both determination and hope within it. He nodded slowly, understanding their desire to move forward. Still, he felt a tug inside him, a quiet worry that leaving too soon might still be difficult for them. But he respected their decision. He brought out a small cloth bag containing food, dried bread, fruit, and a couple of boiled potatoes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to help them through another day of travel. At first, Naya tried to refuse politely, saying they had already taken enough from him. Daniel shook his head firmly, telling her that travelers should never walk hungry. His words came out with simple honesty, and she finally accepted the bag, grateful but still humbled by his kindness. Before they left, Daniel saddled his horse and offered to guide them to the beginning of the old trail. He explained that it wasn't far, but the land between the ranch and the trail could be confusing for those who didn't know the turns. Naya hesitated for a moment before agreeing. She understood that Daniel's help would make their path safer and quicker. The younger sisters nodded, trusting Naya's judgment. Daniel mounted his horse and motioned for the women to walk beside him. He kept his pace slow so they wouldn't fall behind. The journey began across the sunlit fields, moving toward the distant line of trees where the land rose gently into the hills. Birds flew overhead, chirping bright morning songs, Every sound felt peaceful. The sisters walked quietly at first, adjusting to the weight of their blankets and the feel of the soft ground beneath their worn shoes. The youngest sister occasionally glanced at Daniel, curiosity still glowing in her eyes. The middle sister stayed close to Naya, whispering small observations about plants or animal tracks they passed. Daniel listened to their quiet speech, feeling surprisingly at ease with their presence. As they moved deeper into the fields, the path narrowed and became more uneven. Daniel dismounted to walk beside them for a while. He pointed out where the land dipped, where tall stones hid beneath the grass, and where travelers often misstepped. The sisters followed his guidance carefully. Every so often, Naya asked him questions: how long he had lived on the ranch, whether he traveled often, what seasons were busiest. Daniel answered simply and honestly. With each step, the connection between them grew stronger. Not one-sided, not forced, just natural. Like the steady flow of the creek where they first met. They reached a small hill overlooking a valley. From there, the old Apache trail began to show itself, a faint line worn into the land, visible only to those who knew what to look for. Daniel stopped at the top of the hill and waited for the sisters to catch up. When they reached him, he pointed toward the path. He explained that the trail led east for a few miles before turning north. He told them he believed their family would be somewhere along the northern stretch. Naya studied the land carefully. Her eyes moved from the distant trees to the winding trail. She seemed to be searching for signs only she understood. Finally, she nodded. She said she recognized the route and that it matched the path her people often used. Relief softened her expression, easing the quiet tension she carried. The sisters stood together, looking at the long path ahead. It was clear they were ready to continue. Still, something unspoken hung in the air. A moment of goodbye. Neither side seemed eager to rush. Naya turned to Daniel with a calm but deep sincerity. She thanked him for everything he had done. She thanked him for his patience at the creek, for offering safety without conditions, for feeding them, for giving them shelter during the storm, and for guiding them now. Her words were gentle, but each one carried meaning. The middle sister added that his kindness had given them more than food and rest. It had given them hope that there were people in the world who still believed in peace. The youngest sister nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. She didn't speak aloud. Daniel listened quietly, feeling a warmth in his chest. He told them he had only done what any person should do. He said he didn't see them as strangers or as people to fear. He simply saw them as travelers who needed help. And he said helping them had changed something in him too. It had reminded him that kindness traveled in both directions. Naya stepped closer, reaching out her hand. Daniel hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her handshake was firm, respectful, and full of gratitude. Then the middle sister stepped forward and gently pressed her palm to the back of Daniel's hand, a silent gesture of thanks from her culture. The youngest sister moved last. She simply looked at Daniel with a small, soft smile and nodded. It was perhaps the strongest gesture of trust she had given him yet. Before they left, Daniel offered one final piece of advice. He told them to follow the northern path carefully, to watch for broken branches and footprints, signs that their family might be ahead. He reminded them to rest often and stay near water sources. The sisters listened closely, taking every word seriously. Then, at last, their journey had to continue. The three women stepped onto the old trail. They walked slowly at first, adjusting their blankets and tightening their grip on the food bag. Naya looked back one final time. Daniel stood on the hill, watching them with quiet pride and hope. His expression was calm, but he felt a strong emotion growing inside him, something like respect, something like admiration, something deeper than words. Naya raised her hand in a simple farewell gesture. Daniel lifted his hand in return. The moment was silent, but full of meaning. Then the sisters continued walking, their figures becoming smaller as they moved farther down the winding path. The morning sun shone on their backs, surrounding them in warm light, as though guiding them forward. Daniel watched until they disappeared behind a curve in the trail. When they were finally out of sight, Daniel exhaled slowly. He felt both peaceful and strangely emotional. He realized that what had begun as an accidental meeting at the creek had grown into something unforgettable. These three women had walked into his life unexpectedly, stayed long enough to teach him something about trust, and left a memory he would carry for the rest of his days. He walked back toward his ranch, the land stretching wide and open around him. For the first time in a long while, he felt the world was larger than he had understood before. He felt connected, not just to his ranch, but to the people who passed through it, people who carried stories, strength, and journeys of their own. He didn't know if he would ever see the three sisters again, but he knew one thing for certain: he would never forget them, and he hoped, quietly and sincerely, that somewhere on the trail ahead, they found their family waiting with open arms. Their meeting had changed him, and in a quiet, timeless way, he hoped it had changed something in them too.